Hi there. In this screencast, we'll finally get to the actual programming of this application. So we have an HTML layout with a form in it, and I've added a button with an event handler that calls something called a function. I haven't created that function yet, and I'll explain what a function is when I create it. I just need one more thing, and that's a place to put the output. So I'm going to create a paragraph. P is for paragraph in HTML, and I'm going to give it an ID so I can refer to that ID in my JavaScript. And I'll be very particular about what I call that so I know what the heck it's for. So if you give yourself your variables meaningful names, then you'll know what they do. Form output. And some people would express it like this, by the way, because HTML could be considered a word, I guess, even though it's made up of capital letters of other words. And now, so all of our form is available there, basically the form of the application. Now I'm just going to create, this is how we add JavaScript directly to HTML. One of the ways, I should say. There's other ways, which hopefully I'll show you in the future. And we're going to create a function with this name. So a function is basically an encapsulated piece of code that you can call with an event. Generally, code will run as it's loaded and read. But if it's in a function, then it won't run until somebody does something like click a button. So there's a bunch of event handlers that can call functions. So I'm going to call this exactly what I called it here. Now that little bracket, open and close, that can hold something called arguments. I'm not going to get into it for this application, but be aware that that's what those brackets are for. If there are no arguments, we still need the brackets. Otherwise, it's not a function. So it kind of like gives you an indication that we're looking at a function. And then the form of this thing is we say function. To create a function, that is, we say that we use the keyword function, and then we create the name for the function. And your naming convention should be very similar to your naming convention for variables. One thing is it can't start with a number. So if you want a number in your variable name, you have to put it somewhere else rather than the beginning. There's a couple of other rules that I don't want to get into quite yet. And then in curly brackets, we add the code that's to be executed. So I'm going to leave one of those curly brackets on the same line 18 there, and I'm going to give myself some white space, and then I'm going to hit tab to indent. And indenting is common in coding. So first of all, I want to get the values from the fname input, the lname input, and I also want to create a date that I get from the user's workstation. So we can actually get environmental information via something called objects, as well as variables, and then display that back to them. So basically, these days there are thousands of pieces of environmental data that are at our disposal. Things like geolocation, screen size, stuff like that. All right, so I'm going to use exactly the same name I used in the input for my variable name. You don't have to do this, but again, that's my convention. And then the code to get something. Now notice what happens as I type. So it gives me code hints. Now I'm already a DOCU, so document, and it actually tells me a little bit about what the heck a document is in JavaScript. Document object. Now if you want to read more about this, notice when you click on it, mouse over it, you get a little tooltip there, even more information. And if you want to read more about the document, which I do advocate, if you want to learn more about programming, always click on those little eyes. Let me just show you what's happening here. now I have a little article to read all about documents. And a document is a huge part of JavaScript, by the way. We use something called a document object model. And there's a bunch of little areas and elements in a document that we can grab a hold of in JavaScript. So this is where they talk all about that. And notice it's a huge, big, long article. Again, read it if you have some time. Don't worry if you understand it or not. But if you have some gumption and you think you know how, you can try out some of the things it's telling you. Otherwise, just ruminate on it and just be aware of this. It's not in the reading the document object model, but you'll hear web designers, people who code for the web designers and developers, they'll talk about the document object model a lot. So again, the reason I'm showing you this is that this is all available to us via the actual application that we're using to code this application. So you can learn about how to code as you're coding. If you enter all of the code that I add in your script, I would read every single time one of these things pops up. If you have some time, go and read about it, or type all of this out again in the future and let yourself read about it then. Alright, so document. I could just press enter to choose that. Now I type in dot, and now it basically has a bunch of things I can do to the document. Here's a list of everything I can do to a document. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more about the coding language that you're coding in, you can try out all of these. I already know what I want though, so I'm just going to start typing it. And it is get element by ID. So notice it's singular. You should only have one element with a particular ID in your document. So I'm just going to press enter. That's what I want. And then I just enter the name of the element that I'm getting the value for. So that's fname. It's this one right here. ID, name goes here. And then we need to say this is actually an object that we're grabbing, so you can grab a whole bunch of information at the same time, but we're only grabbing just the value that appears. Now we terminate all of our statements in a lot of different programming languages with a semicolon. That's kind of like a period in English. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but with lname. So I'm going to copy and paste that, Control C and Control V, or your Mac counterpart. I think it's Option or Command. I can't remember. One of the two. And that should be our last name as well. So now we have these things in a variable. That's what this is here, a variable. So basically we just took a whole bunch of information, no matter what it contains, and then we just gave it a very short name that we can then use later on. So variables are basically any time a value of something will change, you want to use a variable. I like to think of variables as cells in Excel. They have a name, like the very top left corner cell is A1. Whatever you put in there, it'll be A1 equals the value of whatever's in that cell. Now I'm going to grab also my date. So I'm going to say my date. We can't use date, by the way, as a variable name, so that's why I said my date. And now I'm going to say new date. Sorry, new date. Now notice if you type in new, it might tell you about something about new. No, it just says it's a keyword. So if you want to Google that, this basically creates an object, by the way. It's just very powerful. It takes a while to realize how powerful this stuff is. Now, creates JavaScript date instances. And a date, this is actually an object. So new date. All right. Now I want to put this output into this paragraph, which is called HTML form output. So this is the last thing. So this is a very powerful script. I've got the information into variables, all the information I want. Now I just need to present it to the user. So it's document, again, get element, and then the name of the element. So it's, I'm just going to copy and paste this to make sure I don't make a mistake with that spelling. And that's a good practice. Now we're going to have to add a little bit of extra stuff here. This is, we're grabbing this thing here. So this is called, this area here is called inner, because it's between some tags, inner HTML. So we go to dot, and notice it says inner HTML gets or sets or gets the HTML syntax describing the element's descendants. That's not very descriptive, so you might want to read more about that. I'm just going to press enter. So we're going to get that, and then we're going to make it equal to what we express in our variables. So I'm going to add some English here. Hello. So anytime you want to use some text in phrases, you have to use quotes. This is a value of a variable. I'm going to say hello there, and I'm going to say space, so there's a space between my last name. Now the way we add stuff, this is called concatenation. We use an operator. So that concatenates if we're using text, it adds if we're using numbers. Again, that's a whole other discussion that we don't have time for. This video is already getting long. And I'm going to say fname. So it pops up. Notice it finds my variable. It guesses which variable I want. So that's another thing the IDE helps me with. Plus, I'm going to give myself a space here. Plus lname. There we are. Plus quote space, it is now space plus my date. So this is kind of programming in a nutshell right here. So again, we looked at creating a layout with HTML. We ID'd the elements that we need to get the information from. We created an event handler, which is the button, which called a function, which we then created, and then we created a variable to get a value from a form element using JavaScript. And we did that once more, and then we got a value from the user's operating system, or system we could say, depending on where they are. And then we displayed all of that back to them by sticking a value, which is this. You could actually assign this to a variable and then just display the variable. Again, which is probably something I would do in real life, but it's grabbing hold of that and sticking that in there, which is right there. So let's check it out. Hopefully it works. So I'll choose File, Save. And you can double check your syntax against mine. You can pause this video and take a look at this, or if you want a copy of my file, request it and I'll upload it to the LMS. So let's quickly take a look at what we have so far. So now I can try this out. So I'll open up my index.html file in my browser and add my first and last name and see what the output ends up being. So I'm just going to go to my folder here. I can just double click on that. I'll just open that there. That is not open but drag. Now this is a little clunky here. If you wanted that to highlight, you have to do a little bit of extra work, but you can do it. And submit info. Hello there, Marcus Lander. It is now Monday, September 14th, 2020. So you'll see that I'm working on this at lunch for you all so I can have it ready for the Monday, as I promised. So there you go. That's my time, not yours, of course. Not the time of the person who creates the script in the first place, but the time of the actual user. So like some environmental data, very, very powerful. So it works just fine. So try all of this out. Try out the 3 videos. If you have any problems along the way with each of the videos, post the index to the discussion anywhere you like for week 2. I'll find it and I'll find your problem and create a new document. I'll comment. You'll see what a comment is. I'll comment where I made changes. So again, you can just watch these videos and hopefully glean a little bit of knowledge from these videos. It'll be better yet if you try them out. You'll get some understanding about a couple of the programming concepts so you can communicate better with your programmer, or again, some of you are actually planning on doing some programming yourself, so this is a good first step. Thanks so much for watching.